All right. Hey everyone, I am here with Sonja Lyubomirsky. She is a psychology professor at the University of California, Riverside, and the author of How to Feel Loved. So, I have followed your work for a long time. I interviewed you for my own book. You're like the OG happiness researcher, so I'm very excited for this conversation. The first question might sound kind of obvious, but I think is really key to the what follows. Why is it important to our well-being to feel loved?
Hmm. I've been studying happiness for 36 years. And it took me a long time, I guess, to figure out that, and it sounds like such a cliche, that really the key to happiness is feeling connected and loved. And I'll just, if I back up for a second, my lab developed sort of what we call happiness interventions back in 1998. And so happiness interventions are basically like clinical trials where we experimentally, prompt people to practice different happiness strategies, like expressing gratitude or doing acts of kindness or simply acting extroverted. And, under the right conditions, these practices make people happier. And then a few years ago, it kind of hit me that almost all of the interventions that work to make people happier, the reason they work is they make people feel more connected to and loved by others, right? So when I write a gratitude letter to my mom, it makes me feel more loved by her, right? When I do an act of kindness for a friend or colleague, it makes me feel more connected or closer to them. And then I got together with Harry Reese, who's my co-author on the book. He's a prominent relationship scientist. And I asked him, so what does he think is the secret to happiness? And he said, I don't really know, but I know that the difference between people who are really happy and who are unhappy is that happy people feel loved.
I've noticed that too, that like every time there's a book that's like the secret to the longest living, happiest, healthiest people, it's always just like they have huge families and tons of friends and they socialize a lot.
Yeah, relationships. Yeah. But I think something that's important to note is that you can have tons of friends and sort of networks, and you can actually be loved, but not actually feel loved. So that's why our book is really about how to feel loved. Because most people, when we ask them, we've done surveys, when we ask people, is there a relationship in your life right now where you don't feel as loved as you'd like to be? We want to feel more loved. And most people, but the majority of people say, yes, there's at least one relationship like that. Because again, you could feel love, but that sort of love is sort of not getting in somehow. And that's really the key, that, not just having people around you, because you can be lonely, right, surrounded by people.
Can you elaborate on that? Because I want to read a line that I liked from early in your book. When you actively show another person that they are seen, valued, and cared for, you initiate a cycle that naturally leads you to feel more known and cared for yourself. Can you talk a little bit about this science of actually feeling loved and how that's different from just knowing a lot of people?
We argue that in order to feel loved, you really need to be known. And you also need to make the other person feel loved too. So we actually say that if you want to feel more loved, you want to start with making the other person feel loved. To be known, you need to kind of open up. So one way to think about it is that we all have sort of walls around us, and those walls are important. They're there to protect ourselves. But really, we're all walking around with these walls. And if my walls are sort of too strong and too high, the idea is that I really will never really feel loved if someone doesn't really know me, because they're not seeing through those walls. Because I always wonder, if they really knew me and they knew all about my strengths and weaknesses and faults, then they wouldn't really love me. And so the key is really to be known. And then to become known, you need to share, you need to listen. And so a lot of our book is about how to get to really know the other person, other people in your life. And then the idea is that they will reciprocate and try to get to know you.
And you have a really compelling visual metaphor that you use throughout the book called the relationship seesaw, and that's SEA saw. Can you describe why you called it that and how it works?
Yeah. And the sea is because we're sort of in the sea, like in water. So imagine a seesaw kind of partially submerged in water, and you and I are sitting on opposite ends of the seesaw. And we're mostly submerged, because that's kind of like the wall around us, that most people don't really see most of us. We're only sort of showing the tip. And the tip is often kind of the positive things, right? Like, because when we're interacting with other people, we want to impress each other, right? I want you to know that I'm kind and I'm smart and I'm interesting and I'm funny. We tend to sort of we kind of broadcast our positive qualities. We tend to sort of hide our shortcomings and our contradictions and our weaknesses. And so we're only kind of like seeing the tip. And then the idea is, if I really truly pay attention to you and I show genuine curiosity in you, and I really genuine, like you can't fake it, and I ask you questions about your inner life and and the details of your day and what is really going on with you, that's going to make you feel safe and you're gonna trust me, and you're gonna like, you're gonna be motivated to sort of open up a little bit. And the idea is it's as though I'm like pressing down on the seesaw and I'm lifting you up a little bit out of the water. And so you're able to kind of show a little bit more of yourself because I'm really curious about you. And also once you start talking, I'm really listening, because we all most of us are not very good listeners. I'm not a very good listener. Really, truly listening and taking it in, asking questions. Like, how often are we really asked deep questions about our inner life, right? Like, people think that we're going to be thought that we're too intrusive or personal or probing when we ask questions. Actually, the truth is that we want to be seen and heard, right? We want to be asked at those questions. So I'm really curious. I'm listening. I'm asking you questions, and so I press down the seesaw and I'm kind of lifting you up out of the water, which means you're showing more of yourself and you're getting known to me. And so, and you're feeling, and I'm also showing warmth towards you and acceptance. And it's going to make you feel loved. And then the idea is then you reciprocate. Reciprocity is very, very powerful. It's very hard for us to sort of do something and then not reciprocate. And then that you will hopefully reciprocate and then show that genuine curiosity in me and ask me questions and truly listen and show warmth and acceptance towards me. So then you lift me up in the water. So we're kind of lifting each other up out of the water.
Got it. The water being the cold water of small talk.
Or just or you can think of it as kind of like the wall, or like it's like the iceberg, the tip of the iceberg, right? Is sort of the part we're showing. And underneath is like the part that we're not really showing to each other.
I see. Yeah. So you write a little bit about chemistry, and I thought that was interesting because a lot of times people say chemistry like you have it or you don't with someone, kind of like we didn't have any chemistry or the chemistry wasn't there, usually in a dating context. How can you actually create chemistry or responsiveness with another person?
Yeah, it's not easy. I mean, and I have to admit, like sometimes there just isn't chemistry. And so there may be the relationships where it's just not going to happen. But I really think that process that I just mentioned where you really are responsive to one another. Responsiveness, this is actually Harry Reese's, my co-author's theory. It's called partner responsiveness theory, which is this idea that the key to relationships is that when both people make each other feel understood, valued, and loved by truly listening and really and caring about what the other person is saying. It's amazing how rarely that happens. Like when you think about last time you were at a party or I don't know, talking to friends or your family members or romantic partners or colleagues, like how often are they, I mean, sometimes they look like they're listening, but you kind of know, but you really can tell, right? Are they truly, truly listening, truly following up? Like, do they truly, really care, about what you're saying? And so, but that dynamic when you're kind of truly like curious and listening to each other and asking questions and also showing warmth and care. I think that's when you can build chemistry. It doesn't always work, but I think it's going to work lots of the time.
I'm later going to rag on myself, so I'm going to brag a little bit. I am a good question asker because of my job, and I often find that people don't ask me good questions in return. Is that because we just don't ever really learn how to ask questions unless you literally have to do it professionally? Or why is it that this skill seems to vary so much?
Yeah, it's so interesting. And I I've been on dates where I'm asking questions. The guy doesn't ask a single question. I'll even call it out sometimes. I'm like, do you realize the last 45 minutes you haven't asked me a single question? Sometimes that ends the date, which may be good riddance, right? But yeah, I guess we don't learn. I mean, I tell my kids, if you want to make friends, show interest in them and ask them a lot of questions. People like to talk about themselves, but it has to be genuine, right? So, so if it feels like an interview or an interrogation, right, then that's not going to work. It also needs to have a back and forth, right? So if you're only, of course, if you're only asking questions, then it's sort of asymmetric. So ideally, it has to be both ways. So yeah, I think we don't really learn to ask questions. But again, I mentioned before, there's studies that show Nick Epley, who's at University of Chicago, has done studies that show that they just assume that people don't want to be asked, especially sort of deeper questions, that people will think it's going to be awkward, that people will think oh, you're asking, your question is too intrusive. Sometimes that could be true. You really have to read the room, right? So there's so much emotional intelligence involved in all of this. I kind of wish that every school had emotional intelligence courses, because there's so many subtleties, right? You have to kind of ask the right question at the right time, right? If it's too probing right away, then people are the walls are going to come right back up again. Right. But, maybe you sort of start small, but I think we all have to remember that we all we all want to be seen and heard. And we would love for people to show interest in us.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So in addition to being good at asking questions, I am also awkward. And so I'm going to ask some questions for the awkward among us. Basically, how to apply some of your tips if you're not the most natural with social cues. So, one of the things that you talk about is disclosure. And this is, sort of this concept that like you can't just like hide your cards completely. You have to like share a little bit about yourself
Hmm.
to the person you're trying to bond with. And be a little bit vulnerable. But some of those tips like seem, I guess I'm wondering like how to apply them in various situations. Cause like, for example, you talk about choose topics that are likely to foster connection or match your disclosures to the situation. And that's
Hmm.
one I really have trouble with. Like, I'll tell my
Hmm.
birth story like in the grocery checkout line, and I'm just like a huge oversharer, but other people are not. What's a way to like disclose without being TMI or just like too
Yeah.
much?
Again, that's where that emotional, that attunement comes in, right? Like to be really attuned. So you start small, right? So like I would say you start small. Not like I hate small talk. I mean, I understand small talk is important for like it's like a little social lubricant at the beginning, but like start like a little small, medium. Maybe you disclose a little bit, and then you watch the person. You watch. Do they seem interested? Do they seem a little awkward? Like is it a little uncomfortable for them? And then if it's uncomfortable, then you don't want to go farther at that point, at least, maybe later. And so, yeah, so it's maybe something like instead of saying, they ask, how are you? Instead of saying, I'm fine, you might say, well, I'm kind of a little struggling today, or I had a rough day today. Um, but not too much disclosure. So yeah, of course, oversharing is also could get people's walls to go back up. In the end, it sort of involves a lot of practice. And I said a lot of attunement and listening and sort of back and forth, see how the person, we all know people who are just like not attuned at all and they'll talk. I actually was at a party recently and there's a friend who just will just talk and like is completely unattuned to like people are just like do not want to hear the story and just is not seeing that at all. That's kind of an extreme. But like yeah, watch for people's reactions. Are they like looking away because they're not listening? Are they following up? And then maybe sometimes like then you ask, them a question so that see maybe they want to share a little bit because again, it needs to be a back and forth. I know of like friendships that actually have ended when one person sort of shares, the other person never shares, and then it's just so asymmetric that they just can't continue the friendship.
Yeah. Do you think it's because we're both Russian that we don't like small talk?
That's so funny. Yeah, I came from the U.S. from Russia when I was 10 years old. It's interesting that might be part of it. Yeah, that might be part of it. I just feel like life is too short for small talk. It's just,
Yes.
and some people, and again, depends what you mean by small talk. I don't like, for example, if you're like really into basketball and that's like your passion, talking about basketball, right, is not small talk, right? And again, by deep talk, I don't mean sharing your deepest secrets or traumas. It's just sort of having a conversation about something that you care about. And it could be like a book or a movie that you just saw or read. It could be just something that's important to you right now, but not just like, I guess I feel like small talk is just something like you're just making conversation for the sake of making conversation. And I've gotten pretty good at like breaking that. I was on a date not long ago where we had actually a really good conversation. It was a first date. We actually were talking about the war in Gaza of all things. So it was a kind of an intense conversation. It was really interesting, but I just still felt like it was like on this level that was like we weren't really connecting, right? Because idea is that you connect when you really go deeper. And so
Uh-huh.
so I said to the guy, I said, you're a little intimidating. And he's kind of an intellectual like powerhouse. And he's like, really? And that kind of broke through, and we sort of talked about that a little bit. And so like it suddenly the conversation went to another level, right? So
Uh-huh.
I think we've all had that experience. So I guess I mean by small talk, I just mean the conversation that's just like on this level that's like not, it's like not, you're not connecting. And sometimes, by the way, that's what you want to have at a dinner party. Maybe you want to talk about, politics, and that's interesting. The point there isn't to connect, it's just to share information and to
Uh-huh.
learn, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah, journalists do that with profile subjects. Like one strategy is just to like throw them off like their like talking points in order to get deeper information.
You're
And
telling me
so
your
yeah.
secrets.
Yeah, exactly. So you also write about kind of listening more attentively and listening better, for lack of a better word. And
Mhm.
I'm wondering how, and this is something I struggled with also while I was reporting my book, because one of my kind of things that I did was try to have better conversations and to listen better. But I have a lot of people in my life who I don't agree with about really important things. Like just like huge matters of importance in the country. And I'm wondering like how you show a lot of warmth and attentiveness when someone's saying something you completely don't agree with. Like, I don't think you should vaccinate your kids.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Haha, I hear you. This has to do with actually one of the mindsets that we talk about in our book, which is called the multiplicity mindset, which is sort of this idea that we're all kind of a quilt of both positive and negative qualities. And, I can be loyal and kind sometimes, and sometimes I'm selfish and narcissistic, right? We all have that. And the idea is that we see both ourselves and other people in all of their messy complexity. And just because someone doesn't believe in vaccines and we are like very upset about that, doesn't mean that we don't, maybe we might not love that person, or we might feel warmth towards that person and sort of as a whole. That's not always true, right? And so the idea with like really listening is that you can make someone feel understood and heard without agreeing with them. And you can think about like a therapist talking, say, to a severely depressed patient who like feels they're worthless and hates themselves. So they don't agree that that person is worthless, right? But they respond in a way that makes them feel understood, like they understand, why they're feeling that way and what's going through their mind. So the idea is that you listen and you show curiosity. And actually, curiosity is like almost like the balm, like the salve to like so many things. Where imagine during the fight, like you're fighting with your spouse and they're really angry. And instead of being angry back at them, you actually show curiosity. You're like, wow, like, I wonder why they're so angry like that. You're really curious. Like, this is really interesting, actually. Why they're something's really triggering them. And so same with like the friend who like doesn't agree with you on something, to show curiosity, like, why do they believe that? Like, because really, like, let's say that they're mostly a rational person and they're not crazy, so clearly they have a reason to believe what they do. And so like to really try to understand the roots of people's like beliefs and try to make them feel like, I understand like where you're coming from, but I don't agree with you. And by the way, this increases understanding. It reduces prejudice. It really reduces polarization, fosters connection between people who are very different.
So kind of like, how did you come by that belief? Why is that important to you? Questions
Exactly.
like that.
And then
Yeah.
sometimes you're really surprised. I'm like, oh, and sometimes I kind of get it. I'm like, wow. And to me, that's important because sometimes I just don't understand why someone believes that. It just doesn't make any sense, right? And
Uh-huh.
like some of the Trump supporters, but sometimes I understand. I'm like, okay, this is like, they're like this one issue voter, and they really care about this one issue, and that, I don't know, that somehow makes me feel better about the world because then the world makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
I'm interested in capitalization, which is another
Mm-hmm.
technique that you mentioned. Essentially, I'm recapping here, but responding enthusiastically to friends' good news. Can you elaborate on that and talk about why it's important?
Yeah, so interesting. So this is Harry Reese and Shelley Gable, his former student, who's now a professor at UC Santa Barbara, had developed this concept of capitalization. So this idea that, there's been a lot of research about, relationships and how people respond to sort of problems or bad news or things that are bad that happens. And mostly like we're not always great at, emotionally supporting our partners or our friends when things bad happen, but we tend to sort of know what to do. Like it's sort of, yeah, we kind of know we want to like, give them a hug or like ask them how they're feeling, give them emotional support. Um, but when something good happens, I think we're not as good at responding. And so, and because there's so many, I guess there's so many things that could go through our mind. So let's say, our partner comes home and says like, hey, I got a job offer in Atlanta, right? And so, you might be like, oh my God, what does this mean? Like, are we moving to Atlanta now? Right? Like, there's like a lot of mixed emotions. Or even if it's not something like that, like, hey, I got an award, you might feel like kind of envious that they got this award, or, or you're really stressed about your own thing and like don't have sort of the bandwidth to sort of support them. But really, it turns out, and some studies show that how we respond to a partner's good news is actually a better predictor of relationship duration than how we respond to a partner's bad news. And so people respond just differently. Like the worst kind of response is kind of to ignore it. Like, hey, I got this honor, or to kind of like, oh, great. And then you sort of change the subject or even say something negative about it. Like, or you're boasting again, and so capitalizing is like when you really truly celebrate and like, and again, getting back to sort of curiosity and listening and warmth, when someone says like, hey, I got this, whatever, this thing that happened great at work today, you're like, really great, oh, how did that make you feel? Oh, let's celebrate. Or, what went through your mind when that happened? Or, like you really ask questions about that person's like good news. It's amazing actually how like we don't do this all the time. You think that we do, but and once you start paying attention to like sharing of good news, you realize that a lot of people are not so good at like responding to good news.
Is there a tactful way to do that? Like I'm thinking about like often in journalism it is kind of zero sum, and like if someone won an award that means you did
Hmm.
not win that award. Is there a way to be like, "Oh, I was hoping I would win that, but I'm happy for you."
It's such a good question. I actually think like maybe we should do more research on this kind of thing because I have an issue with this. Like if you feel like you want to sell it, like or like let's say the person who won the award, right? They want to tell people, like they want to celebrate that, right? Like and they, they maybe they worked really hard, but like there's so many people you don't tell, right? Like maybe you don't even tell your colleagues, and I'll tell like my family members about my like successes because I feel like there's a lot of colleagues or friends that it sounds like too much like boasting, and then my kids will be like, "Mom, you're boasting," and I'm like, "Well, if I can't tell my family, who can I tell?"
Yeah.
But yeah, in terms of the other person's response, like I don't know. I actually have never been asked that question. I think maybe you can first sort of really celebrate and be like, that's awesome. And by the way, it has to be authentic, right? You can tell when it's sort of not authentic. Like people say congratulations. Well, I remember when I was trying to get pregnant and it was really hard and I was upset about it. It wasn't happening a long time ago. And then like a friend would get pregnant, right? Like, and I'm like happy for them. And yet I'm like unhappy because it's like another thorn, right? So maybe at first you celebrate, but then later on you can kind of share like, and again, I'm a big fan of sort of sharing in vulnerability. You can do it the wrong way. Maybe you can overdo it, but often it's often people, this is the vulnerability paradox that people will actually like you more when you say like, yeah, when I heard that news, I have to admit like there was a little bit, and then the other person will appreciate it because they often feel awkward themselves because they might be aware of that, of your thoughts.
I've noticed that with some people, like I really try and I like use techniques similar to this or some of these techniques, and the friendship just never really gets off the ground or like it just doesn't seem to go anywhere. And then some people I feel like, I almost don't have to remind myself of some of this stuff because it comes so easily because maybe both of us are really good at, being attentive
Mhm.
listeners and
Mhm.
sharing just the right amount or whatever.
Mhm.
Um, how do you know when to give up on a
Mm.
potential social connection, I guess, or when you should push deeper and go like, "Hey, you're kind of intimidating," or whatever, kind of break
Mhm.
through, or versus just like, "This person is not for me."
Yeah, and we have no, it's such an important point because and we have a few times in our book, How to Feel Loved, we talk about that sometimes because you're doing all these things because you want to feel more loved by this person. So you're trying to make them feel loved by really, again, showing curiosity and really listening to them and sharing. And we really believe that that is going to be successful, I think, a good deal of the time. And again, when it's done sort of at the right pace, at the right time when you're trying to be attuned. But there's going to be times where it's just not going to go anywhere. And that's when you give up. So it's hard to say like when. Hopefully, like you'll know it when you see it. Like I would say, let's say something's not working. The person is still not sharing. And the person is still not listening. You might try a different approach. You might sort of keep trying a bit, and then at some point, there's individual differences. Some people just maybe don't care, or they don't have. Again, they're going through a time in their life they just don't have the bandwidth to do that, or maybe they just don't like you, and yeah, you might want to pause, accept that there's it's not going to go farther, or like put a pause in the relationship, maybe even walk away from that relationship.
You talk about self-compassion, and I was wondering if you could elaborate here on the importance of self-compassion and
Hmm.
what's the line between that and narcissism.
Oh yeah. Because I often wonder about that myself. Well, first of all, I'll start with this sort of idea that there's this idea that like you can't really like feel loved by others or love others before you love yourself. That I think that's wrong because I think it really goes both ways. We kind of learn to feel loved and to love in the context of relationships. So both things are kind of happening at the same time. But if you really have low self-esteem, if you don't have self-love and self-compassion, it's going to be really hard for you to sort of believe that other people love you. It's kind of this idea like if you have a cup of love and the other person is expressing love to you, it's just like not going to get into that cup, or it's going to leak out because you might not, yeah, you might not sort of find their expressions genuine. You might not even notice that is an expression of love. Like you just, yeah, you're maybe sort of too focused on your own kind of low self valuation. And so yeah, I think self compassion is so important. And again, self compassion it's not just like high self esteem. It's basically like when something goes wrong, when you make a mistake, when you fail at something, to sort of treat yourself like a kind friend would treat you. It doesn't mean you give yourself a total pass, because that was also always my problem with sort of self compassion research. I'm like, sometimes I do a bad thing, and I really should
Yeah.
feel bad about it. And the idea is that that's fine that you do feel bad about it, but you don't beat yourself up like more than needed, I guess, and you kind of learn to grow from it. And so my favorite technique for self compassion is to imagine like your kindest, warmest friend, and how would they react to that? And they might say, yeah, you did a bad thing. And then they say, look, you know, forgive yourself. Like, we're all human. We all make mistakes. Let's move on. Let's learn from that. And yeah, because I think narcissism is something different. It's really more of like in fact, narcissism would be like, I didn't do a bad thing. I think that's one of the sort of symptoms is like, I didn't do anything wrong. It's like you're the one who did something wrong. I think narcissists often will say that. It's like it's your fault. But the idea is that, yeah, you acknowledge it, but then you move on and you're sort of kind to yourself. You show compassion, you forgive yourself.
Last question is about one of my favorite topics in psychology, which is self-complexity.
Hmm.
What is self-complexity and why can it be protective?
Yeah, so interesting. Yeah, I mean, there's individual differences in sort of how complex like people see themselves as, and again, you can sort of think of it like a map, of all your kind of qualities, and some people kind of think of it as like sort of you're sort of good or bad, like black and white, and we relate this to the multiplicity mindset that I mentioned before. This idea that like we're all actually very messy and we're very complex, and again, it's like this giant kind of like tapestry of sort of good and bad things. By the way, the idea of multiplicity comes from trauma research, and it came from this idea that like if you have a trauma, it doesn't define you. It's not like for the
Mm-hmm.
rest of your life you're defined by your trauma. Just like if you do a bad thing or if you do a good thing, like that doesn't define you. You shouldn't be sort of defined by your worst behavior or your best behavior for that matter. And it's so hard. I mean, I feel like as I've gotten older, I've gotten better at like both self complexity, but also seeing other people as more complex. And so like if I do bad, well, it's easier for me to talk about in terms of other people. Like often a friend will say, I can't believe what that guy did. Can you believe what he said, what he did? And I used to be like much more judgmental. I am sometimes judgmental, but I used to be more judgmental. I'd be like, oh my God, you're so right. I can't believe he did that. And now I sort of see that. I'm just imagining a guy who like says something really awful. I actually see the little boy inside of him and what might have triggered him to say that. And often it's like because he's threatened because it's like that little boy who used to be rejected by women when he was a teenager, and now that's triggering him, and doesn't excuse or condone that behavior, but it sort of makes you see that person as really complex. It doesn't mean that they're a bad person. You sort of see, like, you sort of try to understand that behavior, and same thing with yourself, like to sort of, and actually it's a little bit easier with yourself, I think, because you know yourself better, right? So like you did this thing and you see, well, and you see like why. Another example from my life is I once did something that wasn't great. And then what I realized when I broke it down, it wasn't actually just one bad thing. It was like a series of like, I call them like micro thoughtless behaviors. Like I made a decision that was like a little thoughtless, and then that led to another like micro thoughtless decision, and maybe there's like 5 micro thoughtless decisions in a row that kind of led to something that wasn't great. And just seeing that, I kind of forgave myself a little bit, is because I still don't, learn from it. I'm not going to do that again. There was just really a series of like little steps that sort of went awry, not like one big bad thing. I'm like, I'm going to just do this. So anyway, that's complexity, right?
Oh, interesting. I had also read about it or heard about it, I guess, as like seeing yourself as like not just, I'm a journalist, but also like I'm a
Hmm.
mom and I'm a friend
Hmm.
and I'm a wife.
Hmm.
Like it can be good to have like different roles in your life that you see
Absolutely. So yeah,
yourself
you can think.
as. Yeah.
I was thinking in terms of like traits. Yeah. So like sometimes I'm extroverted, but sometimes I'm shy. And but yeah, in terms of roles, in terms of abilities, right? So like I'm really good at math, and sometimes I'm not so good at writing, and so there's so many hobbies, behaviors, right? Like sometimes I say the wrong thing, but then other times I'm really attuned. So yeah, absolutely. I think there's just so many different ways you can define yourself and describe yourself.
Well, where can we find the book?
You can pre-order it right now anywhere. Our website is called howtofeelloved.com.